You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Well, hello, everyone. I hope you're having a great day today. And this is Doug Thorpe in another episode of Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Today, we are going to step into the world of cybersecurity. It's a hot topic. There's inevitably something practically every day that hits the headlines about some business or another being impacted by a cyber threat or some notion of that with all the craziness that's out there in the world today. I've had the good fortune of being introduced to a lady who is a industry expert. She has just recently been named one of the top 50 women we most admire. Her name is Tammy Klotz. Tammy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Doug. Thanks for the opportunity to have a conversation with you today. I'm looking forward to it.
I'm curious to start our discussion by the fundamental question: how did you find yourself moving into the cybersecurity world? What was your career evolution like?
Yeah, so I spent the first 24 years of my career in a variety of different technology roles within the IT organization. Towards the end of that tenure, about year 21, I got tapped on the shoulder and asked if I would be willing to take an opportunity in our internal audit function. And when I was approached with that, I was like, should I do this? And in the end, I decided to do that. And it was probably one of the best things I could have done from a career perspective because it gave me an opportunity to understand in a publicly traded company, what are the most important things from a board perspective? What is the board interested in hearing about? And in that role, I actually was given the opportunity to run the first cybersecurity program assessment for that organization. So that was the first kind of dip into the cyberspace. And I did that for about 3 years in that audit function. And at that point in time, the company had hired a new CEO. They were spinning off one of their businesses, and I was given the opportunity to join the new organization. And when I interviewed for a member of the leadership team there, I had interviewed for a service delivery manager position, not the security position. And the hiring CIO came back to me and he said, he's like, I want you on the leadership team, but I don't want you in the role you applied for. I want you in the CISO role to lead the security program for the organization. And once again, I was like, okay. And I said, but there's probably more qualified people out there than me. I've not done this before. And his wisdom to me at that point was that I knew the leadership team that was coming with us. I understood the business. I had the audit background, and we could figure out the rest while the company was forming. So 10 years ago, had you asked me, I would have said, yeah, no, this wasn't in my career trajectory, but here I am. I've now done the CISO role. This is my third company that I've been fulfilling that role, each a little bit different, but all in manufacturing. So that is how I got started.
Well, can you break down a similar evolution of the sophistication of the threats that are out there now? And that may be a whole workshop in and of itself. I don't know, but can you kind of hit the high points of what maybe even in your role, what you used to be worried about and focused on and thinking about versus what's evolved and what you're thinking about today?
Sure. So one of the things that's been a constant for me, given my tenure as a CISO in the manufacturing space, is always looking at things from an operational technology perspective, things that are happening on the production floor at the manufacturing facilities. So that has, it was there when I started. It continues to be there today. We need to protect our organizations such that their, manufacturing is not halted. The organizations, the locations that are actually making the money for the business. So the sophistication of those attacks definitely, changes and morphs over time. But if you think back to, kind of the thing that started the OT security space was the Stuxnet incident, where there was a centrifuge interruption that had occurred and disrupted the supply chain and caused havoc across the organization. Those are the types of things that we're looking out for on a regular basis. So it is about unauthorized access to systems that people should not be able to manipulate, whether they do that as an insider for the organization or whether they're coming in from the outside trying to disrupt and have financial gain or interruption of the supply chain. So that one's been a constant. I think the other one that is really a constant and the most common attack vector for all of us continues to be email. So again, that's not changed a whole lot as an attack vector. The sophistication, especially with the advent of AI and different technologies that are coming into space, has made it much easier for the bad actors to, send through a grammatically correct email with proper capitalization and such. So it's not as suspect. And, the other piece of that is really, if you think beyond kind of that ChatGPT experience, but if you think about deep fakes and being able to easily imitate executives in the organization, not only through text messaging capabilities, but now visually as well, and how you train and educate your staff to validate that, the email that they received is who it says it's from, the person they're talking to is who they say they are. So it's really around some of the basic hygiene things that you want to continue to focus on within the organization.
Yeah. Well, I know many of my listeners will probably relate to this. As an executive coach, being hired periodically to go into different larger, I'll call them Fortune 1000 companies, sometimes I'm asked to sit down and take their internal training about system security,
Yes, absolutely.
basic ethics and conduct and everything, which I'm happy to do if the client needs it to be so. And there is a constant repetitive theme in most of those training packages that do have to do with some of the what might otherwise be simple original methods, like the email scams and text scams and things of that sort, which maybe it's because of the just proliferation of all that. People have been desensitized to email, and they get used to just banging out a reply to something, or heaven forbid, open an attachment from something that, maybe they shouldn't be doing, and being on guard for that is really, I would agree that I don't think that's changed all that much. Mm-hmm. Maybe some of the technology that helps them get that done has changed, but yeah, it's a strange world out there in that regard.
Absolutely. And, I think some of the challenges around that, you speak of, you yourself having to take the training of the organizations that you're working with. And that's really been my kind of position, is that anybody who has access or a network or an email account is required to take that cybersecurity training, because they're interacting with our systems and on behalf of our organization in a lot of cases. And sometimes that gets challenged, right? Folks are like, oh, this isn't part of my daily job, especially from the folks that are, working on the shop floor. I don't do this very often. I don't just live in front of my computer all day. But my approach to that is, well, that's even more reason for you to take this, right? Because you're not in it every day. You're maybe not as aware of it. So bringing you kind of into the circle of the things that you need to look out for, I think, is extremely important. And then the other thing that I specifically try to do is to make it personal, because they're not only experiencing this stuff in corporate They're also being, impacted by different types of phishing schemes, whether it's themselves, whether it's their children, whether it's their parents that are, potentially falling victim to some of these things. So I try to make it transferable to them as an individual outside of the walls of the corporation and, how it impacts them personally.
Yeah. It is an ever present danger, as the movie title says, and it is something we should be very vigilant about. But let me ask you this. So you're sitting in the official seat of the person that's supposed to have the ultimate responsibility for this, but I'll use the word, it's really a team sport when you're talking about an organization. So how do you typically try to go out to stakeholders in the business that you work for and communicate the urgency and the change? We were joking in the green room that Tammy may have the job that a lot of people don't really want to hear from on occasion. It's maybe not always. And I loved her reply to it. You want to share that with the audience here?
Yeah, and I think the answer was it depends, right? It depends on the message that's being bore, but it also speaks to the culture of the organization that you're working in, right? And if the recognition is there that cyber is a risk for the organization, and you've established yourself with some credibility within that stakeholder group, when you're coming to the table, the expectation is that you're coming with facts surrounding an incident. You are able to express the impact of that incident in terms of business impact, not necessarily in IT speak or technology speak. So, being able to translate the messages into terms and vernacular that the business leaders are used to hearing from a business risk, business impact, outage, downtime, inability to produce product, revenue loss, all those types of terms tends to turn their ear where they're willing to listen and understand. And the same thing goes when you're trying to talk to them about, new technologies that you need to introduce or new processes that you want to bring to bear so that the organization is better prepared to respond and prevent incidents in a lot of cases. So talking to them about those types of things. So I have a cybersecurity steering committee that I meet with regularly that is represented by cross functions of the organization to really build that awareness and understanding. And then I meet regularly with the executive team as well, where we talk about very high level statistics and metrics for the organization and what are some key things that are going on that they've probably heard about in the Wall Street Journal or on Forbes or any of the circles that executive team runs in as well, and being able to translate that into, okay, if that happened here, what would it look like?
What would it look like?
And why did it or may it not actually happen here? And then talking through those scenario-based situations.
So to help make all of that happen over time, if I may get a little personal, how do you think your leadership style has changed over the years?
How has my leadership style changed? So I think from a communications perspective, as a CISO for an organization, I believe my primary responsibility is to be a risk advisor for the rest of my peer group and my executive team to explain, there will be times when folks will want to do something, whether bring in a new technology, bring in a new application, and we'll have to have a conversation about, what does that mean from a security perspective? So speaking in terms of, okay, I understand this is what you want to accomplish from a business objective. My goal is to keep the organization safe. So let's figure out how we accomplish both of those. So that I would say is, that communication style, the active listening has evolved over the years so that you can interpret and replay back to who your key constituents are, that you do understand what their business requirement or what their ask is, and then talk to them, in terms of, okay, we can do that, but these are the things we need to think about from a security perspective. So, it's about educating folks about your why, and why you want to do something or why you don't want something to happen. And I've probably done more and more of that in my CISO career to really get folks to kind of embrace and understand why we do things the way we do from a security perspective. So.
Well, that kind of reinforces a common recurring theme we talk a lot about on this show, and that is, as a leader, creating clarity.
Mm.
And I'm going to sum up what I think I heard you say just now, in that a lot of it is about driving for clarity, that ability to listen and really hear what they're asking for. That's a step toward clarity. But then translating into the risk spectrum, proper allocating somewhere on that risk spectrum, all right, your idea is safe and easy, no big deal, or gosh, you're going to have a lot of tripwires with this, and we need to talk about that. And being able to then explain and create the clarity around the risk so that a collaborative solution can be reached.
Yeah, I think that the two bits that I would add is that the methodology around risk acceptance, right? And who has the authority and the ability to actually sign off on whether an organization is willing to accept a risk, right? In the OT space, the operations technology space, there's oftentimes systems that are older that cannot be upgraded because the piece of equipment that it's controlling is, a big investment to actually upgrade. So what are the risks that we're assuming as a result of not upgrading that system, and articulating that and documenting that so that, it's quote on record should something happen, right? So risk acceptance, a risk register, these are the things that we've acknowledged in this space. And then the other piece from a risk perspective is really where are your trade-offs, and what are you willing to accept or walk away from? Where's your risk tolerance? What's the risk appetite of the organization? So that's why, CISO, aka risk advisor, from a cyber perspective, is really how I try to position myself within the organization. And transparency is key, right? A lot of times, people want to not talk about the things that happen from a security perspective within an organization. And I'm much more about making people aware of different activities that do happen, so that, people who say, oh, that doesn't happen here, I can turn around and say, oh, no, it actually does. And here are some of the examples. So, to be transparent about that. And then oftentimes, you never want to paint a rosier picture than actually does exist within your organization, because that will always come back to bite you. So being transparent and factual, kind of about the state of affairs from a cyber perspective, is always key.
I as you were describing all that, and we'll unpack some of that, but I'm going to share just something that flashed through my mind. It was a flashback. As most of my listeners know, I started out early part of my career in banking, and this was when banking was more in now what feels like dinosaur age. But because of technology limitations and things, we had a practice, and it was actually a federally mandated in the banking review world. If you had signing authority at the bank of any level, it was mandatory you took a full contiguous 2-week vacation at least once a year. And the logic was that all known bank fraud events perpetrated by internal actors had time bounds on them.
Right.
And they would unravel inside of a 2-week window if you couldn't be there to flip the switches and make the thing happen. So it was a mandatory documented event and a very high visibility compliance review matter. If you, for whatever reason, didn't take your 2 week
2 weeks.
vacation,
Yeah.
you got on a short list of a whole lot of new levels of audit coming through your group.
Yeah, I actually was just talking to somebody, I think it was last week, and very similar, not in the finance industry, but it was really around the fact of like a 8 week kind of hiatus to step away and to disconnect. And it was more about the fact of, making sure that the team could function without you to build the knowledge. And, that was also a forced requirement to make that happen, to help with more so knowledge transition, and filling the gaps in your absence. So yeah, definitely.
Well, back to what you were saying about some of the process and accountability and such. Um, how do I want to ask this? Let's talk from the board level down. I know the whole sense of exposure and risk for board members has changed over the years, going all the way back to the advent of Sarbanes-Oxley and some of the big headline fails of corporate enterprises, publicly traded enterprises, where it was deemed the board was asleep at the wheel and not really monitoring what was going on. Not to pick on them, God love them all, but what have you seen change in that landscape over your career?
Yeah, so over the time that I've been fulfilling this role, right? Security, again, it depends on the organization, but ideally what should be happening from a reporting perspective these days is that there should be a quarterly update to the board on what is happening from a cyber program perspective, right? Whether that be the new projects that you're thinking about doing, the gaps that you're closing from a risk perspective, any major incidents that need to be discussed, et cetera. I think over time, how that has evolved, typically it used to be like a once a year update to the board about this is what's happening. And now, given the fiduciary responsibility of the board and the accountability for cyber as well, there's definitely a need for more frequent updates to the board. I think the other thing that we've kind of wavered on is whether or not, boards need to have a cybersecurity expert fill a seat on the board. And we've gone back and forth on that with the SEC reporting requirements that came out last December. So, it's still, I think, maturing in some places. And I think it depends on your industry as well, with regards to how much attention is given. And then the other struggle becomes, okay, so where does cyber fit from a reporting perspective to the board? Is it in the audit committee? Most of the time, I think that's the committee that wins often, who gets oversight for cyber, but there's also for full board reporting in some cases, risk committee. It really just depends on, the organization. And I think the acknowledgement of where cyber needs to be addressed and the charters of each of those committees. So I think frequency has changed. I think, committee composition has changed. And I think just overall, reporting requirements have obviously changed over the past couple of years as well.
Yeah, yeah. If I may ask, how big a team do you have in your current organization?
My team is less than 10 people right now. So we're a $3 billion company with 3,500 employees right now. So we're protecting them, and those are dedicated security professionals that are on my team. But they're looking after not only like cybersecurity operations. They're looking at, architecture and how we're building new solutions. But then I also have I have an individual who's doing like governance, risk, and compliance activities from an audit perspective. Somebody who's looking after identity management as well as training and awareness activities. So, there's a pretty broad set of skills that are encompassed within the team. And then we're reliant on a lot of our supporting organizations to assist as well.
And fly over and participate with. Well, what do you see on the horizon? What are you? What might keep you up at night about what's looming over the hill?
So I think the challenge is, right, I can protect what I know about. I think part of the challenge for all of us in this role is we don't know what we don't know. What is out there? What are our users doing that we may not be able to detect in certain situations? And then, I think the other piece of that is what's evolving in the technology space. And I would be remiss if I didn't touch on the topic of, artificial intelligence and AI and how that's changing things. And, there's definitely new risks that come in as a result of AI. And, one of the foundational elements of, being able to secure your organization when using AI capabilities is making sure that you have a solid data protection strategy, right? So many organizations, have either, I'll say immature data protection strategies, non-existent in some cases, but how are you classifying your data so you can teach those AI and LLM models what is appropriately accessible and can be used. And then obviously, some of the danger there is what stays inside and what goes outside from a data exfiltration perspective. So
Right.
it's not necessarily new risk, but how the risk is being, I guess, exacerbated or attempted to be exploited is some of the challenge there.
That's one of the areas that I guess I've heard more about, not being directly related to this space or this issue, but with the notion of AI being introduced, obviously there's a lot of pluses for using AI to help manage your business.
Mhm.
When you start thinking in terms of the high-speed analytics you can perform, pattern recognition, trend line, leading indicators, not lagging
Sure.
indicators, and all of those good things. But to your point, the risk is that if it's not managed properly, the entry point to that data that might be very proprietary and very confidential all of a sudden gets exposed to the entire globe as as data points in the vast spectrum of data that's out there.
Yes, absolutely. And
And
what I like to say to folks, Doug, is folks are starting to kind of wrap their head around what this AI thing means and what does Copilot mean. And it's going to change the way that we work. There's no doubt about that, right? Just like the internet changed the way we worked. And we've figured out how to use that to our advantage, and others have figured out how to use that to their advantage, hence our disadvantage, right? The same thing is going to happen with AI. There will be people who use it for good and people who use it for bad. And it's our challenge to figure out how we get our organizations to kind of wrap their heads around what is acceptable and what is not acceptable in those situations, and really thinking about, okay, so if I'm asking a question that potentially is about, something we're investigating from a new R&D perspective, well, depending upon where that goes, that could potentially expose, some new technology that we're looking at, some proprietary information. And it's benign in its intent, but when it gets into the wild, it could be potentially misused.
yeah, yeah. Very good. Well, Tammy, we're about up on time. Thank you so much for sitting in. I certainly hope that the audience was able to glean some nuggets here and get some fresh perspectives on how they ought to be thinking about their cybersecurity protection. Tell folks the best way to get a hold of you if they'd like to have a further chat about your experiences.
Sure, absolutely. The best way to find me is to search on LinkedIn for my profile that's out there. You'll see a lot of referenceability to some of the things I've been involved in, but that's the best way to get in touch with me at this point in time, Doug.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much for sitting in. And as always, folks, we're going to have Tammy's LinkedIn link in our show notes. And it's an interesting read. I can tell you personally, prepping for the show, I went through most all of her profile. She is a very accomplished woman in this space and very well regarded. So very worth the read, if nothing else. But I do like to remind you as well, we've got a video version of this show over on YouTube, channel by the same name, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Hop over there, check it out. Leave us any comments you might like to share. And I think that's about it for today. So we're going to let you get back to your life and events. But like I always like to say, go out there and make it a great day.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.